Welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. Happy wildcard weekend. Keep your heads on a swivel out there, everybody. Today's, though, I want to be focusing on something a little bit more fantasy focused and maybe, just maybe, actionable here down the stretch, and that is early 2023 top 6 fantasy football rankings. So not going too nitty-gritty just yet, but I did think it'd be fun just to go ahead and look, again, closely at the guys that we're going to be drafting more times than not in those first 3-4 rounds, and having some of the tough questions about where exactly these tiers drop off, who doesn't quite make the cut, and things of that nature. So again, appreciate you guys tuning in to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. And with that, let's get going with our top 6 at each position ahead of the 2023 season. Starting off at quarterback, guys, pretty clear, I think, top 2 here. Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts taking my top 2 spots. With Josh, 35 plus passing touchdowns in 3 straight years. And oh yeah, he averages the 3rd most rushing yards per game in NFL history. Like, I think we all realize how athletic Josh Allen is. Him just jumping over the goal line against the Dolphins a couple of weeks ago. Like, I get it, but just again, the 3rd most productive quarterback in NFL history, rushing behind only Mike Vick and Lamar Jackson. I don't know, it surprised me. So the one problem with Josh is just kind of the boneheaded turnover-worthy plays that happen from time to time. He was tied for first with 29 turnover-worthy plays this season, but doesn't really matter that much in fantasy. He freaking runs and passes so much, he makes up for it. And in real life as well, still leading the number 2 ranked scoring offense. So Josh Allen, Kings stay Kings, my number 1 QB ahead of next season, followed very closely by Jalen Hurts in a very similar breakdown. We have 2 guys that run the ball so much more than basically any other quarterback, not named Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields. But the difference with Hurts and Allen is we actually have the proven ability to rack up big time throwing numbers, at least here in the past couple of years, with all due respect to 2019 La MVP. But yeah, this season from Hurts was special, guys. 25.2 fantasy points per game, 6th highest mark in a single season ever. Only 2019 Lamar, 2011 Aaron Rodgers, 2018 Mahomes, 2010 Michael Vick, and 2013 Peyton Manning were better than 2022 Jalen Hurts. So again, supporting cast is fantastic. You look at it, 2nd highest combined PFF receiving, rushing, pass, and run blocking grade from all of his friends around. And it's just that fantasy-friendly rushing workload, especially when they get inside the 5-yard line. Specifically, guys, from the 1-yard line, Jalen Hurts and Ezekiel Elliott tied for 2nd in the NFL with 8 such carries. First place, give you a chance to guess. Number 1 in the NFL and carries from the 1-yard line. He had 16 of them. Jamal Williams, DeAndre Swift. Fantasy faithful, I'm sorry. Number 3, going to be Patrick Mahomes. Just broke Josh Allen's 2-year reign as a fantasy QB1 without Tyreek freaking Hill. Now owns 3 of the top 12 seasons ever in fantasy points per game. Kings stay Kings. Patrick Mahomes has been awfully royal since coming into the NFL back in 2017. Number 4, going to be rolling with Lamar Jackson. Man, look at the guys that he's been thrown to this year. Here are the wide receivers in Baltimore that have a reception at some point or another in the 2022 season. Demarcus Robinson, Devin Duvernay, Rashad Bateman, Deshaun Jackson, James Prochet, Teelan Wallace, and Sammy Watkins. They unironically added Deshaun Jackson and Sammy Watkins to this room, trying to help in the year 2023. I like Mark Andrews. I like Isaiah Likely. Give me a healthy J.K. Dobbins. Okay. But my God, I don't want to be watching Ravens games and be cursing Lamar for overthrowing 300-pound Patrick Ricard, who's running a wheel route for some fucked up reason. So yes, Lamar Jackson, I know we did not see the same guy in weeks 4 through, 12, 13, whenever he got hurt that we saw in the first 3 weeks of the season. But that first 3 weeks of the season was a gentle reminder that Lamar at his best is truly the best fantasy quarterback to ever play the game. That's what we did see in 2019 when he set the NFL record in fantasy points per game. So back in Baltimore, maybe they get to more of just a straight spread attack without Greg Roman potentially in the picture. If not, a man can dream. The Commanders, the Jets, we got some offenses out there that need a quarterback, and they would be blessed to have Lamar under center. Last 2 here, we do have Justin Fields coming in as my QB5. Again, a lot of this is dependent on what happens in free agency and what the Bears want to do with that number 1 overall pick, but only 1 finish outside the top 12 after week 4, including 5 top 5 finishes during that stretch. He just ran for the 2nd most yards by a quarterback in a season ever, and I already know, guys, I'm going to have this rant freaking 30 times this offseason, but the fact that people can't wrap their minds around like Justin Fields and Daniel Jones not having the most passing success in the world this season, My God, look at these wide receiver rooms starting the year, and then they all got hurt. What do you expect to be left here? I mean, we had the Bears coming into the season with PFF's single lowest rated wide receiver corps. And guess what? Darnell Mooney got hurt in week 12. We had to listen to national reporters act like adding Chase Claypool was this big vote of confidence in Justin Fields. Like, oh, hey, he played pretty well the first 3 months of the season. Now let's trade what ended up being the 33rd, 34th overall pick for Chase Claypool. And oh, yeah, then he gets hurt anyway. Slash can't find the field because he apparently didn't know the playbook well enough. So Justin Fields, hey, if they decide they want to go with Bryce Young or someone instead, then yeah, he's not going to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback. But back in Chicago, just by virtue of how fantasy friendly his game could be, and maybe, just maybe, a mediocre group of pass catchers. Could we ask for that? Justin Fields, don't be surprised if 2022 was not a fluke and more so a sign of things to come. And finally, Joe Burrow just finished as the QB4. And what impressed me about Burrow this year, guys, only had 4.1 fewer fantasy points from rushing than Patrick Mahomes. So Burrow really coming out of LSU. I mean, I was really all over him more in the rookie year. Pause, sorry. But more over, in the rookie year because he was checking a lot of the same boxes that we had seen from past top performers. Ran a lot more at LSU than he got credit for. And we saw a good bit of that as a rookie. Didn't see it as much coming back from the ACL. Understandably, got back to doing it this year. So no, he's not ever going to, be in the Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts discussion for, rushing yards or anything like that, but not a bad little floor to add on top of seemingly a yearly lock for around 4,500 passing yards and 35 touchdowns. So unlike Fields, unlike Lamar Jackson, we don't have the same concerns about the pass game weapons he gets to throw to. Joe Burrow, my QB6 ahead of 2023. But once again, guys, there's so many questions out here. I mean, pure free agents, we have Tom Brady, Lamar Jackson, Geno Smith, Daniel Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Baker Mayfield to figure out. And then looking at just teams that might need a quarterback or just at least want to upgrade from what they have, the Jets, the Titans, the Colts, the Texans, the Raiders, Commanders, Panthers, Saints, maybe even the Falcons, depending on how they felt about the Desmond Ridder show out there. So there were a couple guys that were close specifically after Fields. I do think it's a slight tier drop off to Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, and Justin Herbert. By the way, Chargers, Jaguars, losing quarterback has to shave their head. I've heard worse ideas. Also keep an eye on Kyler Murray's ACL recovery. He would be right here in this mix with a full slate of good health. Also have to look at Dak, Daniel Jones, Tua, all guys that had pretty solid years just now. Don't think they're quite in that top 6 conversation. And maybe, just maybe, we get a Trey Lance dark horse bounce back should the 49ers decide to move on from the Brock Purdy, Jimmy G experience. And finally, the one quarterback that's probably going to be nowhere near the top 10 that we do have several seasons seeing him in the top 10, Deshaun Watson. So Cleveland games did not go well at all. There was some context, though, that we went through on this very podcast about some of those drop touchdowns and everything. So full, maybe less newsworthy offseason for Watson. Maybe he does catch his stride in 2023. Moving on to running back. And again, just some of the free agents we have: Saquon, Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, Miles Sanders, Raheem Mostert, and Jeff Wilson, Tony Pollard, Kareem Hunt. A lot of shakeup is possible here for Beyond. So I will say, out of those free agents, based on what we've heard, it does sound like Saquon Barkley is someone the Giants want to have back in the fold. I don't have that same level of confidence for Josh Jacobs. So he's going to be one of the guys not listed here where, hey, if the Raiders do decide, that they declined his 5th-year option and just didn't mean it or something, and they still want him here long term, yeah, Josh Jacobs will be right back into the top 6 conversation. But for right now, thinking Josh Jacobs could be going somewhere else, I'm not overly thrilled about chasing that on another team. Typically, running backs that do change teams aren't nearly as productive there down the stretch, with a few exceptions here and there. But anyway, on to the top 6, and don't need to spend a ton of time on the top 2, but for me, it is Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler. CMC with 37 straight non-injured induced or games where he was traded in the middle of the week with 100+ yards and or a touchdown. In week 12 this year against the Saints, he had knee irritation, I should say. Look it up. But yeah, guys, 8 of 11 games, he had top 12 finishes upon joining the 49ers. And his receiving work was down a little bit, 9.2 fewer receiving yards per game, 1.4 fewer receptions with the 49ers compared to the Panthers, but also scored 11 touchdowns in 11 games if you include that passing score. So McCaffrey, even if his fantasy-friendly workload goes from like a 10 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10 with the 49ers, I think the extra touchdowns make up for it. with Eckler reigning, defending, undisputed RB1 of the fantasy world. I mean, fantastic year. I know that I named Travis Kelce my fantasy MVP, and a lot of people were saying Austin Eckler deserves that award. And honestly, if you do go ahead and just really wait the fantasy playoffs, hey, I could see it going to Austin Eckler, but you know what? In real life, they don't really, I think they got to put their votes in before the playoffs. So playoffs aside, I do think it was Travis Kelce, but I really do see where Eckler comes around. I guess my only concern with Eckler is like, how can he keep getting away with this efficiency on the goal line, guys? Because pretty clearly, I think based on some of the moves they've made, just getting Joshua Kelly more run, go ahead and drafting Isaiah Spiller and all that, I do think they want to keep Eckler to around that 200 carry mark, and I'm just not completely convinced he's going to convert 6 of his 8 touchdowns inside the 5-yard line into scores. I should say 6 of his 8 attempts inside the 5-yard line into scores, excuse me. But I think the bigger issue could be Eckler's receiving usage going from astronomical to just like really good. So again, he's ranked as my RB2. I probably already spent too many words on it, but if you look at it, the first 11 games this year, Eckler averaged 7.3 catches and 45 receiving yards per game. The last 6 games, once we had Keenan Allen and Mike Williams mostly healthy, only 4.5 receptions and 37.5 receiving yards per game. So just one of those things where, again, if we're projecting Eckler staying healthy in 2023 and everyone else on the Chargers staying healthy, I just don't think this passing game at its best wants to be flowing through him as much as they were really forced to during the first 2-3 months of the season. Number 3 running back, going to be Jonathan Taylor. And again, I do think it's a tier drop off after the first 2. So these next guys, again, depending on what Josh Jacobs does, maybe, Breece Hall, we hear some good news about his ACL. Tony Pollard comes back to the Cowboys and Ezekiel Elliott gets cut. A lot of things could happen to shake up this back half. But for right now, I do have Jonathan Taylor as my overall RB3 ahead of some guys that have had similar workloads than him in the past. But I do think potentially from a pure workload standpoint, the best could be yet to come for Jonathan Taylor. So you look at it, and when they traded Nyheim Hines, guys, that low-key opened up one of the only true 3-down workhorse roles available, and Jonathan Taylor was able to get that. So he had legit 94%, 92% snap games once Jeff Saturday was there and Nyheim Hines wasn't there taking the targets out of the picture. So with Taylor, no, he wasn't as good even when he was healthy this year, but he also sprained his freaking ankle in week 4, was in an offense that the run game, the run blocking in particular, really wasn't doing anything until about halfway through the season. And Matt Ryan, Sam Ehlinger, freaking Nick Foles out there, not doing him any favors. So Jonathan Taylor, for me, prime bounce back candidate in my RB3 going into next year. RB4 is going to be Saquon Barkley, 352 touches this past season. He just has room to grow as a receiver, only 21.1 receiving yards per game. I mean, that was a surprising thing. Like with Saquon, based on some of these injuries and the Kadarius Toney trade, you would have thought he could have led the Giants in receiving, just wasn't meant to be. So he has it, in his toolbox, 45, 34, and 30 receiving yards per game in his first 3 years in the league. Hopefully, 2023, Saquon got through it healthy. So far, I'm knocking on wood, go Giants, whatever. But, looking at Saquon moving on, maybe 2024 could be even more explosive. Didn't quite see the same, phenomenal beast out there. Saquon was really good this year, don't get me wrong. But when I'm talking, guys, about truly best running backs I've seen play football over the past decade, 2018, early 2019, Saquon might be there at the top. Here's to hoping we see that guy back and even better in 2023. Number 5 running back, going to be Derrick Henry for me. And we're going to have the same conversation that we have every year about Derrick Henry. It's like, can he stay healthy? And we only have about a half of season over his entire career that says that he can't. So history says this, history says that. I mean, how many 275-pound running backs have we seen be like Derrick Henry and just keep on proving history wrong? So it's one of those things where, we're playing fantasy. It's first or last out here. So with Derrick Henry, again, I really want to stay away from fading guys because he's going to get injured. Because going to last year, it was Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry. We're going to get injured, not Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall and Javonte Williams. Injuries freaking suck. I do think there is something to be said about guys being a little more injury prone, the wear and tear. You've already been injured and all that, but our ability to predict it and our ability to really separate the difference in how much more one guy is injury prone than another, that is where I draw the line. So for me, RB5, Derrick Henry, because you look at his last 3 3 healthy seasons, 321 touches, 397, 382. They've been more willing to throw him the ball, and they're still paying him enough money to continue to feature him to this manner. So turned 29 2 weeks ago. We're going to talk about, the law of 1,500 career carries and how that usually means that we're not getting the best version of a player moving forward. And yeah, I don't foresee Henry, getting back averaging over 5 yards per carry again, but I wouldn't say that he looked like he had exactly fallen off a cliff this year in terms of what he was able to do. And maybe, just maybe, he doesn't have to deal with, Malik Willis and Joshua Dobbs under center for almost half of his season. So Derrick Henry, I think, could again even be a little bit worse, but 90% Derrick Henry with this workload, guys, still likely good enough to be a top 5 fantasy back. And finally, going to be Nick Chubb as my RB6. So going to have a show here coming up. I always like the Colin Cowherd segment where Colin was right, where Colin was wrong. So going to go back through some of my guys, my fades from this last year. And guess what? I was wrong on Nick Chubb because the man just keeps on smashing what we expect him to do in terms of his expected PPR points, which is just a fancy way of saying his workload. What would we expect an average running back, average Joe to do with his touches? I mean, in 2020, guys, Nick Chubb, RB 28 in expected PPR points per game, RB 9 in real. 2021, he was the RB 20 in expected PPR points, RB 12 real, and this last year, RB 18 in expected PPR points, RB 8 real. So moving forward, Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson are both unrestricted free agents this year. Deshaun Watson maybe gelling a little bit more, providing an offense that's a little bit more Jacoby Brissett-esque. Can't believe that now the standard for Deshaun Watson is hopefully getting the offense back to what it looked like in the first 10, 12 weeks of the year. Sadly, we are at that point, but if we can do that without Hunt, without Dearness Johnson taking that pass game role away, Nick Chubb, guys, could finally be having that workload that we know his talents deserve. Because again, it's never been a question of, is Nick Chubb one of the best running backs in the NFL? We know that. But with another really good running back there in Kareem Hunt, he hasn't gotten that same caliber workload. So again, those top 6 RBs, McCaffrey, Eckler, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon, Derrick Henry, and Nick Chubb. Some caveats on guys who did not make it. Breece Hall, with this ACL surgery, guys, I want to be way more mindful about guys recovering from injuries this offseason, and Breece Hall is a major one. Dr. Edwin Porras, who's been on this podcast several times, always does great work over at Fantasy Points. But yeah, basically equated it to potentially a similar situation as 2021 Saquon. So guess what? 2021 Saquon was getting ramped up and was starting to ball out before he had the flukiest, freakiest injury ever, stepping on his own teammate's ankle in that game against the Cowboys. So I'm not saying Breece Hall is going to be useless next season, but I do think it's reasonable to expect him to get ramped up, maybe, be limited the first couple of weeks. It's enough for me to keep him out of the top 6 for right now. Tony Pollard, he's a free agent. The Cowboys pay him a bunch and get rid of Zeke. Okay, he's going to be in the top 6. You bet your ass he will be. But if it just returns and it's Pollard and Zeke again, not going to be quite the top 6. We'll be ranked ahead of Zeke, though. Good to see that. Again, we'll see where Josh Jacobs lands. If he's back in with the Raiders with a big deal, then okay, he's going to be vying for a top 6 spot in his own right. Just not completely convinced after, again, they didn't even pick up his 5th-year option before the year. Kenneth Walker, assuming Rashad Penny is out of the picture, it would be very Seahawks to just not feature Walker here down the stretch. But just remember, Rashad Penny, smaller sample size, was pretty damn good in his own right. Can he stay healthy? Everything has told us no throughout his entire career, but I'm probably overthinking it. Assuming Rashad Penny is not going to be a factor, and even if he returns, Kenneth Walker is going to be a top 10 guy, just not totally convinced he's got enough pass down work, and maybe the offense takes a little bit of a step back for him to be locked in the top 6. Also, Ramondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, Joe Mixon should still be workhorses. Just have a few more individual questions about to what extent. Not quite as convinced as I am with the top 6 guys. Continue to monitor Javonte Williams. And then we even got Dameon Pierce with a new Texans coaching staff. Who could have possibly seen that coming? We didn't talk about that ad nauseum throughout the entire year. Aaron Jones, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, DeAndre Swifts of the world also going to be in play. Also not people that I think are quite going to be going there for the top 6. But as always, we'll have plenty of the offseason to get through the rest of these guys. Before we get on to some more guys at wide receiver. I want to give a quick shout out to some of our lovely sponsors. And the first thing I'll say, guys, if you are looking for some fantasy football to play, head on over to Underdog Fantasy. Their playoff gauntlet has been a thrill to play. I personally have been entering contests all freaking week. And again, it's just a fun time. It's a playoff basketball tournament with $1 million in total prizes and a $100,000 first place prize. Just draft your team before the NFL playoffs start, and that's it. I would say that, if you have not used Underdog before, make sure you use promo code PFF and you'll get your first deposit up to $100 matched. But main strategy, if you've never done one of these guys, you basically, depending on where you're picking and who's available in your first two picks, you're more or less trying to build a Super Bowl matchup and then just get lucky along the way and then get to that final game of the tournament where now hopefully, 80% of your roster is from guys participating in that game. So I do think if you get, a Josh Allen early or, a Jalen Hurts, and you're more or less, okay, maybe with Jalen, you got to worry about, the wild card round, the quarterback stacks are going to be out there. But again, you get your first couple guys and from there you are building stacks. Last night I got one with the Bills and the Cowboys. I tried to go a little zero RB there, a lot of ways around it. So again, go find out for yourself the gauntlet over at Underdog Fantasy. Really fun time. And again, you can use promo code PFF and you'll get your first deposit up to $100 matched. Also, I'll give a shout out to our friends over at Western and Southern. The PFF Fantasy Football Podcast is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, plan to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow. Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right, guys, top 6 wide receivers. I thought this was the most reasonable of the group, and I'm just going to rip them off because they are all pretty clear. So my number 1 going to next year, Justin Jefferson. Number 2, Tyreek Hill. Number 3, Jamar Chase. Number 4, Stephon Diggs. Number 5, Davante Adams. And number 6, Cooper Kupp. So yes, there are some other awesome receivers out there. We have CeeDee Lamb, but I think it's a bit too much of a run-heavy offense. You look at the Cowboys, and I believe it was only the Titans, the Bears, and the Falcons that ran the ball more than them, in non-garbage time situations. So CD is awesome, but those other guys are awesome. I'm just a little more confident in their overall target totals, especially if the Cowboys go ahead and make one of these bigger moves at wide receiver, like they've seemingly been trying to do ever since they traded Amari Cooper for a freaking 5th round pick. Amon-Ra St. Brown, you guys know we love the sun god around these parts, but could maybe have a quarterback change. We'll see what's going on with Detroit, potentially moving on from Goff or not. Jameson Williams being more involved, healthier DeAndre Swift. He's probably going to be top 10, but just top 6 seems like a little high for me. A.J. Brown, again, similar issues as CeeDee Lamb, where he's still in a run-heavy offense, and unlike Lamb, already has a lot more competition in there with Devontae Smith and even Dallas Goedert. Speaking of Devonta, Waddle, Higgins, again, enough of second fiddles here not to be flirting with the top 6. We have Debo in a crowded offense that could be running more than ever if Trey Lance is back under center. And then we got, your Olaves, Garrett Wilsons, Chris Godwins, DeAndre Hopkins, depending on where he lands, DK Metcalf, Marquise Brown, Marquise Goodwin, get out of here. Tyler Lockett, Keenan Allen, all those types. I think they have at least 1 or 2 question marks to, again, not quite make the top 6. So just quickly on the top 6, Cooper Kupp, guys, I know it's been a while since we've seen him out there, but if you just take your 8-game sample size, who averaged the most PPR points per game last season, it still was Cooper Kupp. So was on pace for 198 targets before he got injured. If Sean McVay is going to be gone, that's not ideal. That's why I have him down here at 6 and getting a little bit older, coming off the injury, although it's not like he blew out his ACL or anything like that. Still getting Matthew Stafford back. Cooper Kupp, my wide receiver 6 going to next season. With Davante Adams, really what it comes down to, the difference between Adams and Kupp and the rest of these guys, it's just the lesser continuity with them. With Sean McVay seemingly being on the way out, that's where the smoke seems to be burning at least. And with Davante Adams moving on from Derek Carr to either Jarrett Stidham or someone else. So, hey, I saw it as someone that was a bit too low on Davante going into this last year. And by too low, I think I had him wide receiver 7 or 8 or something like that. So hand up, I was off, but yeah, obviously still really damn good in his own right. Davante obviously balled in 2017, even without Rodgers, when he had Brett Hundley under center. He put up that massive 153-yard and 2-touchdown game with Jarrett Stidham. 168 targets out there. I know Waller and Renfro being hurt did help Adams get featured more than ever, but the amount of money they're paying him and the amount that we already saw Josh McDaniels willing to feature Davante locks him in as a top 5 option for me ahead of next year. In the top 4, Stephon Diggs turned 29 at the end of November, but he's a lock for 100 plus catches, and it seems like he'll be going for close to 1,510 tutties almost every year. Since Diggs has joined the Bills, only Davante Adams, Kupp, Tyreek, and Justin Jefferson have averaged more PPR points per game. Also have Jamar Chase, and this one surprised me, guys. This year, 12 games, Jamar Chase had 134 targets. Last year, 17 games, he had 128 targets. So really, if you just look at, again, those expected PPR points, Chase was the wide receiver 1 this year. So honestly, kind of had a little bit of a down year. I mean, Diggs and Chase were actually leading the league in dropped passes that occurred in the end zone. So we could have seen several more touchdowns for both guys. And look, Chase was still awesome. He's one of only 6 receivers with over 18 PPR points per game over the past 2 seasons. But it's kind of wild that, like, we saw this year Chase not be that absolutely crazy efficient monster that we saw as a rookie and still put up massive numbers because Joe Burrow and the Bengals were willing to still force feed him, especially more so in the underneath areas of the field than we'd seen as a rookie. Number 2 wide receiver going to be Tyreek Hill, 3.2 yards per route run this season. That's the highest mark of the last 10 years. Last year's Cooper Kupp is actually second in that study. Spots 3 through 5. Again, most yards per route run over the past decade. 2015, 16, and 17, Julio Jones. What a freaking peak for that man. Julio Jones and AB, man, if they aren't your top 2 wide receivers from the 2010s decade, I don't know what you're smoking. And yeah, Tyreek Hill back with Mike McDaniel, Tua, clear lead option, easy top 4 for me here. And yeah, only other side note here, Tyreek Hill, all-time leader in yards per carry at 7.5 with the minimum 100 carries. Can you guess who is second all-time in yards per rush with the minimum 100 carries? I'll give you a second. Brad Smith from the Jets. Remember that dude? Wildcat quarterback, returns some kicks. Fun time, Brad Smith. Tyreek Hill, number 1, though. Sorry, Brad. And my number 1 wide receiver ahead 2023 is going to be Justin Jefferson. Although he had 1.1 fewer PPR points per game than Cooper Kupp, we have him ascending. I mean, he turns 24 on June 16th. And yeah, so sucks we had that 15-yard scoreless dud when it mattered most in week 17. But Justin Jefferson clearly deserves to be a number 1 wide receiver going into 2023 and probably beyond. So only thing I'll say is, like, can we this offseason chill out on the Cooper Kupp role? I mean, my God, that was getting so obnoxious. By the end of last year, Justin Jefferson played more snaps, a higher percentage of his snaps, I should say, in the slot in 2021 than he did in 2022. You know what the Cooper Kupp role was? It was Kevin O'Connell. Good job deciding to throw Justin Jefferson the ball as much as anyone other than Cooper Kupp over the past 2 seasons. That's the Cooper Kupp role, throwing your absolute beast, alpha wide receiver a shit ton of targets and watching him make really good use out of it. So I know there's a few more adjustments in that, but just trying to look at Cooper Kupp having one of the best seasons in NFL history at the position, like, I guess trying to equate that to Sean McVay in the scheme, that was always like the insult to me. So Cooper Kupp role for Justin Jefferson, who needs that? It's Justin Jefferson. The Justin Jefferson role was going just fine before he even met Kevin O'Connell. Just a little pet peeve of mine throughout the offseason. That, again, we saw really not lead to anything. All right, guys, quickly at tight end here, I will say number 1, got to be Travis Kelce. And it's so wild when you actually consider this. I mean, he was the overall tight end 1 in fantasy in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and then again in 2022. 6 of the last 7 years, this man has been the overall tight end 1 out there, even including 2 of those with Alex Smith under center. So again, him a Reckler fantasy MVP, Kings State Kings, the Kelce edition. Again, love his podcast. Him and Jason have been putting on all season long. Number 2, still Mark Andrews. And just realize, guys, how disappointing was Andrews this season? Terribly disappointing. And he still had 113 targets. He still was a tight end 3 in PPR points per game, still had 847 yards. So when you look at it, there's just not many players at the position that we can feel this good about having triple-digit targets. I mean, this past year, only Kelce, TJ Hockenson, Mark Andrews, and Tyler Higbee had over 100 targets. So, yeah, some injury stuff played into that. But Mark Andrews as the clear number 1 pass game option for a team with, at this point, still hoping an MVP quarterback under center, still my tight end 2 heading into next season. George Kittle, I was just kind of surprised, like seeing that Kittle played 15 games this year and didn't put up bigger receiving target numbers, really. Because, yeah, we saw the 11 touchdowns, and accordingly, he was able to really take over down the stretch. I mean, top three finishes in the final 4 weeks of the season. Great to see. But honestly, with Kittle, the only reason why I have him below Andrews is the possibility for this offense to continue to be run first in its nature, and potentially more than ever if we do see Trey Lance get his job back. So it's also a crowded group. Kittle, Debo, Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, really any guy could be featured during any given week. Number 4 tight end is going to be TJ Hockenson, 8.6 targets per game. Once he joined the Vikings, I mean, only Kelsey and Kittle had more total PPR points per game than Hockenson since he was traded. So Cousins continues to be more than capable of going for 4K plus and 30 touchdowns. Certainly seem to be featuring Hockenson as much as anyone other than Justin Jefferson once he got him out there. Dallas Goedert, my tight end 5 going to next year, was a tight end 5 in PPR points per game this season. Only Kelsey, Kittle, Andrews, Hockenson were better. Conveniently, those are the only guys I have ranked ahead of Goddard. So I do think this is, again, the pretty clear-cut top 5 that we're going to see around the industry. Kelsey, Andrews, Kittle, Hockenson, and Goddard. And depending on how those discrepancies go in terms of their individual ranking, relative to everyone out there, their overall ranking, I should say, that will depend on who we're actually targeting. So last year, for example, Dalton Schultz was someone that Dwayne McFarland and myself didn't disagree with being the tight end 5, the tight end 6, but it was more so the reality that he was, I believe, the tight end 6, but then Dallas Goedert was going like a good 30 picks behind him, even though he was a couple tight end slots. So we'll see what happens in terms of which of those top 5 tight ends we're going to be targeting. But after this is where it gets interesting, guys. We got Kyle Pitts, David Njoku, Pat Freiermuth, Darren Waller, Dalton Schultz, Evan Ingram if he returns, to the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's a free agent. A lot of options out there right now to potentially take that 6th spot. Right now, I lean Kyle Pitts, but man, we're going to need to see that ADP dip quite a bit in order to be feeling good going after him. So let's remember, the guy doesn't turn 23 until October. He still averaged the 6th most yards per route run last season. He ranked 8th in PFF receiving grade among all tight ends with at least 25 targets. There's just no excess volume in an offense that just ran the ball more than any group that we've seen since the 2009 Rex Ryan-led New York Jets. So not really a guarantee they're going to be throwing the ball more next year. And to Arthur Smith's credit, I mean, Tyler Algier, Cordero Patterson, they had a fairly lethal rushing attack out there. So Kyle Pitts, unfortunately, might just be a better real-life player than fantasy talent at this point in time. Obviously not what we were hoping to see after he had such a great rookie year. So Kyle Pitts, David Njoku, Freiermuth, Waller, Schultz. It is close. If Schultz is back in Dallas, I think we'd have to give him the nod, but I don't think that's a guarantee. Freiermuth, if we had seen more from Pickett, and Njoku, if we had seen more from Deshaun Watson, it's going to be a tier for me. I'm not completely sold on this, as you guys can probably tell from the way I'm breaking it down. But again, Kyle Pitts, tight end 6 for now, but is going to be certainly in a tier with some other guys. And yeah, it's going to wrap up this edition of the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Glad to get through those top 6 players at each and every position. Have some more actionable stuff along the way for you guys here. I'm actually going to be naming the all sheesh team here pretty soon. That's going to be fun. Most unlucky players, guys that were stopped the most in the 1 yard line, some fun stats like that. So we'll get that episode out next week. And then also going to be looking at a bit more of, again, where Ian was right, where Ian was wrong, and also taking a look at some of the biggest discrepancies in players and their expected points versus their real fantasy points of some of the guys who didn't hit ADP and why, and guys who smashed ADP and why. So again, I want to spend this next week or two really taking a last chance to look back, hopefully learn a couple more things about it. And then we'll start going through quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end specifically to try to get some more takeaways. And then I'm thinking, once the Super Bowl's over and all that, getting into March, that's when we can really start sinking our teeth in, really looking ahead more so to next season and hopefully making that sweet, sweet cash and winning some fancy championships, because that's what it's all about after all. So again, appreciate you guys tuning in to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Ian. Until next time, take care, everybody.